during lunch. All right, glad to see all the dialogues and cross-pollination already starting. We will now pass over to Orr, who just finished his PhD.
Yay! Thank you.
With Shafi, and we'll be sharing on WhAM. So take it away, Orr.
Thank you. Let's start us off with this. Okay, so the connection will be revealed at some point in this talk. If you pay attention, you will find out. Now that I have your attention, I'll tell you that this is joint work with Circle Chen, Pranav Muralikrishnan, and Hugo Flores Garcia, who all also just graduated this year, and David, Brian, Shane, and Shafi. So this is what I'll tell you about. I'll tell you what our goal was and a little bit about why we're doing this work today. Tell you how our model works, what we found out about it, and some future directions. As you can see, it's not going to be a very busy talk. I tried not to bore people with a lot of details about the model, but if you are, I like these things. So if you're interested, feel free to interrupt me, raise your hand, ask as many questions as you want, or otherwise face a longer lunch break, which is not that bad. So you all are probably familiar with the Cetacean Translation Initiative with CETI. That's the team that I am a part of. And you may have seen this image before telling you all about how CETI is interested in all aspects of the decoding pipeline, from robotics to marine biology, of course, and then finally analysis of what do we do with all of this data. And the common paradigm for data analysis, at least in CETI, has been to record data, to discretize it in some way. In particular, with sperm whales, we'll consider the interclick intervals. So you just take all of this rich audio signal and you replace it with was there a click or not, and then you train a model on top of that. And it turns out that you can already come up with some pretty incredible observations and results based off of that. So we have Giovanni's paper that does network analysis on the interclick interval to identify vocal styles. And then we have the two papers out of Pratyusha's lab et al., the alphabet paper, and then WhaleLM. You can actually predict diving behavior, again, only based on this discretization. And then we have Gasper's work that comes kind of counter to this approach and is saying, well, Gasper is a phonologist, and he used AI, but he also used his own phonology knowledge to identify vowels. So it turns out that it might not be enough to just keep track of whether there was a click or not. There might be additional signal there. There's a click and an I click, or a click and a clack. And you can try to repeat all of these experiments and see whether these vowels add additional information. Why this is happening today is because who knows what Gasper is going to tell us next year. Maybe there's more vowels. Maybe there's additional phonological features. And I was just coming off of a previous work with Adam and David and Shafi that was a theory paper that was asking how far can we go only from listening. So that was evaluation just now. Before we were just asking in theory, can you even translate? And I wanted to think about a future-proof model that is taking into account the acoustics of sperm whale vocalizations in general. And so our goal was to build a model of sperm whale acoustics. One nice thing that we'd be able to do with it is to generate synthetic sperm whale vocalizations. Those are called codas. And another additional feature that I wanted out of it was to be able to prompt the model via acoustic translation. So Gasper actually already has one of two only papers that I know of that generate synthetic sperm whale vocalizations using a GAN. And here we wanted something that you could prompt with some kind of context. So really what you should think about is acoustic translation. Take some audio signal, convert it into another audio signal, have that target audio signal sound like codas. Importantly, I'll say it very clearly now, this is not semantic translation. They're both using the word translation, and in different domains they are translation. This is not semantics. Semantic translation is the reason that we're all here, and maybe next year somebody will present a semantic translation model, and then CETI will be mission accomplished, and so on. All right, so the whale acoustics model. This is a good picture to keep in mind. We abbreviated it as WhAM. Takes in audio. It could be generated by a whale, could be generated by a dolphin, could be generated by a computer just emitting beeps, and it will convert all of that into coda sounding audio. So it's a translative generative model of codas and of their acoustics. It can translate hopefully any source audio into this coda audio, and then you can start to ask some questions. Is this model good? Is it useful? Is it nice? So specifically we asked, are the generated codas indistinguishable from real codas? Can WhAM translate from a diverse input domain? Where does it fail? And the last question is, are the internal representations of WhAM useful? So are they recovering knowledge that we already have about sperm whale, I'm saying with a lot of quotes, semantics, or at least the grounding that we have of sperm whales, is it capturable in these embeddings? Okay, so first off, let me tell you how we built WhAM and how we trained it. And this is a particularly nice full circle moment because 2 years ago, Brian was standing on this stage and giving a much more interesting talk because he was like stomping and clapping. Okay, I guess I did that as well now, so that's, yeah, bucket list item. But yeah, his talk was about language models for music, or generative models for music. And he told us about one work that was particularly interesting to me called VampNet. So this was Ugo's project in his PhD. And VampNet is an audio-to-audio model. It takes some audio file and it generates another audio file. And a video is worth many words, so I'll just show you how VampNet works. All right. Whether you liked it or not, it took an audio file that was a piece of music, and then it generated a vamp. It's called a vamp in musical lingo, a variation of this audio file. And Ugo is also an incredible guitar player, and you can look him up on YouTube. He's playing with this model. He's co-creating music with it. So that's what VampNet did. Very far away from sperm whale communication for now, but we'll explain how we got there in a moment. Let's look inside this model, and let me tell you how it actually works. So it takes an input audio. It creates discrete tokens out of it. Importantly, these are this is using a neural audio codec, so these are discrete tokens that are not handcrafted features by interclick interval or ICI and vowels, or ICI and vowels in the next Gashper paper. These are like learned completely by a neural compression scheme, if you will, that takes audio and outputs these discrete tokens, a vocabulary of 1,000 roughly. You then mask a part of these tokens. This is called a prompt. And then you put that into a transformer. This is a bidirectional transformer. It's like BERT. You decode all of the masked tokens. Now you're back with tokens. You decode, and then you detokenize it back into audio. So you encode it in the beginning, fill in the blanks, and then decode it. Okay, so were there any questions, by the way, about this architecture slide? I'll kind of move on to talking about training otherwise. Okay. So the training process for WhAM is oh yeah, please.
Can you talk about the mask, please? What does that entail?
Yes, that's a really good question. So when you train BERT, which is like this text-to-text language model, usually people started out by randomly masking tokens and like, I don't know, 20% probability you hide a token. And then there was dozens of papers trying to understand what are good prompting schemes versus others. In the context of VampNet, the prompting schemes that were explored were like so you can regularly mask some of them. Oh, one thing I should say that's really important is that these tokens, it's a rectangle, and that's not a coincidence. This is like the time axis. So you kind of block them off into, I just did the math yesterday, but I forgot how many tokens there are. Let's say like in a 2-second sample, there'd be like 1,000 tokens. So it's definitely downsampled in that regard, but it's not that few. And then there is, on the vertical axis, it's like, it's a VQ-VAE, so the first token, the first row is the most informative one, and then afterwards you just go on and on into more and more finer acoustic features. Okay, so that was very important to say if you're interested in this sort of thing. And then you just mask columns. So you pick random time steps and you mask them. You can pick them randomly, you can pick them regularly to say, let's just, every 10% of this audio file will mask for a few time steps. Another thing you could do, which is particularly nice, is you can run a classical beat detector on the original audio and say, oh, this is maybe the BPM, so I'll mask after the beat, or I'll mask the beat, or I'll mask around the beat. And I actually, finding the right prompting scheme for WhAM was definitely one of the challenges of this work. You could end up with a model that can be good if you prompt it correctly and if you find all these knobs. I ended up literally building a box, like a MIDI controller that has knobs on it, so that, because it was getting too painful to try to twist it and turn it all the time. And I think automatically finding a prompting scheme will be a really cool follow-up work. But it's also very subjective, like what's useful for you. And in the context of VampNet, it's music, so it's whatever that you're trying to create would be the right prompting scheme for you. Thank you. Really good question. More questions? Better questions? Worse questions? Okay, yeah.
Maybe just a few comments on the tokenizer and the temporal resolution.
Yeah, so the tokenizer we used, well, VampNet used the Descript audio codec, which we also inherited by that way. So that's like a company that part of what they do is build these neural audio codecs. We couldn't retrain it. I don't think VampNet, maybe they did end up retraining it after a while, but that was like a really expensive computation to learn this neural audio codec. It uses a vector quantized variational autoencoder, VQ-VAE. The good mental model for that is that it'll first try to learn, so there's like this bottleneck layer. First thing you do is you try to learn the most important thing, the thing that will bring your loss down the most, and then condition on having learned that, you learn the next most important thing and the next most. Regarding the resolution, I do have the number somewhere. I'll pull it up, like regarding how much is it actually downsampling. Yeah. I'll tell you, since you asked, that we were asking ourselves at some point, how much are we losing just from the neural audio codec? Because this is a neural audio codec trained on all kinds of data, and even if there were some sperm whale clicks in there, probably not many of them. And you can like read Gashper's paper, and he's telling you exactly what are the frequencies that are important for vowels. So at least you shouldn't be losing those, and you probably don't want to be losing the things he hasn't found out yet. So we just tokenized and detokenized, and then just measured the loss, and we were like, okay, this is pretty good. Yeah. Okay. All right. So how did we train WhAM? We took the checkpoint that was released in the original VAMP network. That was trained on about 800,000 music tracks. I don't think that it retrained the codec, so that's even inherited from somewhere even prior to that. And then we fine-tuned it. So we did low-rank adaptation. We couldn't fine-tune all of this 500 million parameters, so we do far, far less low-rank adaptation. And it goes in two steps. The first one is domain adaptation. So we just trained it on a collection of animal vocalization sounds that we found. Let me show you some samples of that. Oh, I need my pointer back. All right, so this is one example. Yeah. Sounds tasty. Next one. Why isn't this one playing? Huh. Let's try it one more time. Tragic. Okay. That's life. I was going to ask you what that was, and then somebody maybe would have known it was a walrus. So this would have been a fun moment for the marine biologist to flex on everybody else. That one was from the Watkins marine mammal data set. So that's like the biggest data set of marine mammal sounds. It accumulates to about 4 hours and has a lot of species in there, including some sperm whales. And then this one, I hope, plays. Did we just lose all of our audio? No. This one was the funniest one because I would have asked you what that was, and it kind of sounds like, I don't know, a coyote or something, but then it turns out that it's a man making coyote sounds, and that's been tagged as animal and free sound, and so our model is trained on that as well. Basically what I was trying to get to with these examples is it's a lot of data, some of it is good, some of it is not so good. We didn't have to look very carefully, and then the last step is trained for roughly the same amount of times. We call this species-specific fine-tuning. So here we used our golden data, we used the Dominica sperm whale project data, as well as CETI's growing data set. And this was really the most important step. This is just a feature that we added later. And I want to tell you a note on data curation, on training on those data sets acoustically. So here you have a picture of Shane. Presumably, I think roasting a sea marshmallow is what I think is about to happen here, but I don't know, maybe tagging or doing something else. And I always imagine Shane is living, such a cool life, and like so many of you as well. And then he's like beep beep, and then he's like, wait a second, and then he like pulls out his phone, and it's like an email from me, and I'm asking him a question about line 247 in the Excel spreadsheet. And like I was asking Shane, both Shane and Roy, so many of these questions, so none of this work could have happened without them. Not only did they collect all this data for 15 years, but then I think probably the much worse part is having to go on endless Zoom calls with me trying to piece together exactly how to recover. So we did all of that, and the goal ultimately is actually not that impressive. We just took dozens of many hours of recordings from the field, and we just created this supercut. So if you recall, VampNet is trained on 800,000 music tracks. It's a supercut of music. It only contains music. There's no silence in there. On the other hand, when you record sperm whales in the field, a lot of times you'll just have a lot of periods of silence. You'll have a lot of other noises. You'll have echolocation clicks, which are not codas. So I ended up listening to this kind of thing for a long time. So this just sounds like sperm whale codas, but it's actually unrealistic because they're completely squeezed together, and it amounts to, I forget how many hours there were, but we just validated this by listening. You can listen to the whole thing if you have a road trip or something. I did that once. So you can just make sure that there's no weird things, no silence. So you end up with this supercut. That took like 3 months of work and a lot of tears from me and from the undergrad students I was working with. So let me tell you about the experiments. Unless there were questions about how we trained the model, you can also go back to this later. Good. So our first question is definitely the baseline. Are the generated codas indistinguishable from real ones? So let me ask you. Let's do, if you've played this game with me already and you remember the answers, you can't play any again. All right. Oh, well, this one didn't play, so let's try another one. Hopefully it does. Lucky you. Okay. No. All right. Something isn't working correctly in the audio right now, but you would have gotten some percentage. But we actually ran a listener perceptual study, a little bit more principled, with really the best listeners that you could hope for. So we had Yali, Guy, Shane, Roy, and Pernil. All of these are experts on sperm whale codas or sperm whale echolocation clicks. And we had this hour-long experiment that we ran via Google Forms. So a little bit about our participants. 3 years to decades of experience listening to sperm whale codas. In fact, they basically collected all this data that we use, so they know it much better than we do. They're marine biologists or underwater acousticians from an academic background. And then there were 2 types of questions. So this one is 2 alternative forced choice. we basically showed them a pair, just like the game that we didn't get to play in the previous slide. We showed them paired data, input and output from the model. Sometimes we permuted it, sometimes we did it, and we asked them to identify which one of these codas is the synthetic one. Yes?
They didn't see the sonograms, they just heard the pairs, is that right?
Exactly. So first we did it audio only, and then we did it with a spectrogram. And I'll take a look at the results in a second. Spectrograms helped for sure. Yeah.
So just as someone who's not familiar really with this,
Mm-hmm.
how much of them are in the audible spectrum? Like, are they fully in the audible spectrum?
I mean, that's what we record with the microphones, and that's all the data that's going into the model.
The vast majority of the energy is below 20 kilohertz.
Okay.
Much better answer. Thank you. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is where you could go back to your neural audio codec and say there's no way that it learned anything above the audible spectrum because of what the script was trying to build it for. And, you know, hopefully, well, I don't know how Gasper is going to do that, but let me know. Yeah, okay. The second task, or the second type of task, is just a mixed task. So we had generated codas from all different, for many different kinds of audio domains and some natural codas as well. And they had to spot out the natural ones, and we actually made this imbalanced. So a random guess isn't even that good. And this is how they performed at a very high level. So you can see that when you take audio only, nobody scored perfectly. To me, fooling Shane once was the goal with this paper. So I think that was a sigh of relief. With the spectrogram, a lot of Shane scored perfectly, and somebody else scored near perfectly, and people started getting even better results. Somebody scored worse, actually. So I think we did ask them some qualitative questions. We'll take a look at that in a second. So they built their own discriminator. And some of them, I guess, learned an algorithm that was incorrect, which is pretty interesting to see. The mixed task was the most difficult one. That kind of lines up with your intuition. You don't, I think discriminating between two nearly identical audio files, except one of them came out of a generative model, there's a lot you could do there. And a lot has been done to fool this. But when it's all mixed, and some of it is noisy and some of it isn't, it starts to get messy. Within the mixed, so let me tell you how each domain performs. So these are the domains: whale clicks into whale clicks. So a coda into a variation of the same coda. That I'll call synthetic codas. We took walrus vocalizations and converted them into codas. And we also took digital beeps from a computer and converted them into codas. So this is our maracas moment from the beginning. That was a musical piece called Walrus Coda Song. And okay, the funny anecdote moment. We were so good, not just as confusing our listeners, but also confusing our reviewers, because when we got reviews back for this paper, we had reviewers talking about the walrus codas, walrus coda this, walrus coda that. And I just had to do a Google search and be like, is that even a thing? And as far as I know, walrus codas is not a term from marine biology. Maybe I found eventually one citation, but what I totally did find is this musical piece for maracas and microphone called Walrus Coda Song. So I was like, there's probably no way they're talking about that. And at first I had a very snarky response just saying, like, please give us better reviewers that aren't like inventing terms, but then I calmed down. Yeah, that was the maracas. This is Shafi loves this moment so much about this paper, so I had to include it. Okay, so we got synthetic codas generated from whales. We have walrus decodas and we have beeps decodas. Non-coda acoustic impulse is the scientific name we came up with. And surprisingly, listeners were pretty trigger happy to mark natural codas as synthetic. So that's just, go back to your own data. I don't know, but yeah, that's okay. So that's one thing to notice. But surprisingly, the codas generated from walrus were more tricky to distinguish than even the codas generated from whales themselves. It could be that it's in like a little bit further away from this, or maybe it is in this uncanny valley, if you will. I have all kinds of explanations about that. Yeah.
Look at this in terms of the prime and the kind of things they use usually in cognitive experiments of this type, because Curious is just telling you true positives, right? When you're getting it, and then there is a trade-off between these.
Wait, so do you mean Can you say that again?
Because, so if you look at accuracy, you're just getting how many you're getting right, right?
Yeah.
Then there is, for example, when you do this experiments in psychology, typically people use something that's called D prime,
Okay.
and that weighs how basically the trade-off between correct rejections versus false rejections and correct detections versus wrong detections, because that actually would tell you a lot more about how these things are mixing together.
No, I have a few more splits than this, but not D prime. I will look it up. We did look at like inter-annotated agreement per coda, for example. I mean, that's something that's interesting. It's like if there's a lot of disagreement on the same coda, is everybody getting the same stuff
It's
wrong?
just that if a psychology looks at this, they're gonna ask you that.
Yeah, I would ask them back, probably. Yeah.
This is kind of my fault for not listening
Oh.
well enough. But, so what aspect of the source audio did you want to maintain in the translated version? Like what piece of it should be in both places?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't have like a quantitative answer to that, but when I listen to both of the audio files, I wish those samples were working. I'm sorry. Maybe I'll try to get some live demo or something working for later, but they sound similar. It really does sound like a prompt, and then the prompt getting changed in a way that retains something from the prompt. But
Is it like a style and content thing? I mean,
it also very much depends on how you prompt the model. So if you hide some of the clicks, you might get a change in the number of clicks. But if you keep all of the clicks, maybe the only thing that will happen is if you were clapping your hand into the model, you'll get back the same thing as codas. I don't have a great question for that. I don't know what should be the right thing. We were building this initially kind of as a speculation. So you could think of it as just different seeds. Ultimately, there's one person whose only interest in this project was like, I just want synthetic codas so I can train bigger models, like data augmentation, if you will. And so all they want is like different enough synthetic codas. They want that if their distribution of interest later is going to be collected sometimes from this hydrophone, sometimes from that hydrophone, sometimes this condition, sometimes in that, they want those conditions to be preserved. Yeah, that's, I think, one motivation. Yeah.
Might be related, but I think that codec does use human perceptual similarity as part of the training for that perceptual codec. So it might be kind of designed to sound similar to humans. Wouldn't necessarily mean that it sounds the same to whales, right? So you might get to that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a question to ask even before that is like, do whales ever need to hear this generated audio, or is it only for humans? And that's more of an ethical question. So we should discuss this. We're probably going to have plenty of time. We can like talk about this as well. But that's a very important, like the politics of science kind of question to ask. Yeah. Okay, let me just, before we forget what we're doing, tell you about the comments from our listeners. So considering their decent performance, they mostly had negative things to say about the generated codas. I forgive them. So the only good thing that I could find was interclick intervals, sometimes natural. Okay, so the model, I mean, but for me that was good news, because what I didn't want is outputs that are just like a bunch of good sounding clicks that, you know, at least the interclick interval is something that we believe has signal in it. So we don't want that to get lost. So subjectively, according to the foremost experts, that's sometimes preserved. And then some of the downsides. So DC offset, there's a background noise that's added. Sorry, you just missed the maracas. I know, that's okay. Well, next time. DC offset, there's a background noise that's being added. I'll say we didn't apply any even classical like denoising techniques on the outputs of the model. That's probably something that we could think of like solving easily. Okay, and then there's intra-coda amplitude variation. So the model is not picking up on the fact that when there's a coda that consists of 5 clicks, they're all going to just have the same amplitude, or roughly the same amplitude. It'll sometimes give it louder and more quiet clicks. So that was a really nice observation by one of the listeners. They were like, this is how I ruled them out. I'm not sure who that was. And then within a particular click, there's an unnatural onset and decay. So they're kind of too sudden. They're also too broadband. So as Shane was saying earlier, most of the mass of a click will be fairly low, but then the model is kind of just putting a click as like a uniform thing in some band. Okay, so that's what we learned from the model. We should probably iterate and then run the listener experiment again, but there's only so many times we could do that. So what we did for this next question, so we wanted to know whether WhAM can translate from different domains. And for this one, we used an objective metric of distance between audio data sets. So okay, suppose you have a way to measure, you have two collections of audio, and you want to know which one is closer to some reference. In our case, reference is going to be sperm whale codas. Suppose you have a way to do that. This is the graph we're about to see. Then I'll explain the method, which is pretty sophisticated. Okay. So we have the different domains. They're coming from Watkins marine mammal data set. And then we have a circle depicting the audio data set before it was passed through the model, and then the diamond is after it was passed through the model. So let's break this down slowly. Oh, and the y-axis is this distance. So if we start out from sperm whale vocalizations, that's the reference data set. It's going to have a distance of 0. After being passed through the model, distance goes up a little bit because the model is not perfectly just memorizing it and outputting it. So it goes up a little bit. For all other domains, or for almost all other domains, the audio moves closer to being sperm whale coda audio. So for example, these are those beeps I was talking about. They start out as being in a distance of about 0.9, and they go down to being a distance of about 0.5. And it seems like the model can't really bring this distance lower than 0.5. Like what we would really love to see is the distance going all the way to this baseline of like just the synthetic codas being generated by the model. We can't quite get there. The only strange result was for belugas, the distance went up, but it's up by very little. I'm not quite sure whether that's something strange happening or if it's real. Okay, let me tell you how the y-axis is computed, unless we have just questions about this graph. Okay, so it's about to get kind of like neural, but I think it's very interesting. This is something I learned by working on this paper. So the way we compute distances between, oh yeah, please.
Yeah, so I am curious about then the before and after WhAM, especially since the end stage is on the sperm whale coda specifically, and with if these are the Watkins marine database, if they include just the other kinds of vocalizations versus echolocation clicks, and so would that be accounting for where you'd have some of that shift?
Yeah, I wish I had the same golden data I had for sperm whale codas for all of Watkins, but I don't know of any annotated Watkins that only tells me where the vocalizations are versus like sometimes you have a few minutes of ship noise and nothing else other than that. And as far as this experiment goes, that might be something that's coming into account here. That's a limitation of our data. Even that data set, and we used like the best of supercut, and then we looked into that and we used that. We filtered out a few oddities. I would love to have more data to be able to run this on better data. I don't remember if that was a two-part question or did I answer?
I think the other part of it is also about the fact that the sperm whale vocalizations with the codas in particular is a very different shape in the spectrogram than the odontocete whistles. And so if it's clicks that are kind of those vertical lines that you see, which would appear in certain odontocetes in here, but if versus other types of vocalizations, like for instance, belugas and orcas will also have a lot more diversity in their sound patterns. And so if you're really kind of optimizing in WhAM specifically for the sperm whale codas, then would that account for the fact that like your generative model would try to more closely align to sperm whales versus, and so maybe the echolocation click portions of the sound would then be.
Oh, so importantly, WhAM was trained only with codas, or at least, the echolocation clicks in the data set are are errors. They're not supposed to be there. So it will output coda clicks. We had one listener commented that they did detect some echolocation clicks in WhAM's output. That's a bug. That's a data level bug.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. But
Okay.
like the shape of those vocalizations between sperm whale codas are unique versus other, like the shapes of echolocation clicks will still be fairly similar, even though they'll be, different.
Yeah, I mean, when you're starting from like beluga whale vocalizations, what is really the right kind of click? Like, where do you draw the line between just like outputting a random array of perfectly memorized sperm whale clicks or retaining something from the beluga vocalization, which wasn't that clicky necessarily? Yeah, that's also related to the question that was asked over there. That's kind of we just didn't make that decision for the purpose of exploring, what this model can achieve. I think once we have a specific application in mind, for example, somebody wants to do training on augmented data, then we can make all those choices that work best for that decision. But given that this was kind of speculative, we just decided nothing. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, I'll say a few words about this audio distance, because otherwise I don't think this graph makes sense. So, so you want to compare the distance between a collection of audio files and a reference. So what you do is you pick an embedding model. You pass all of this audio through the embedding model. Now you have a bunch of points in high dimensional, like r to the t. Okay, and then once you have these points, you can compute whatever metric you want between a collection of points. In this case, the Frichet inception distance, which is why it's called the Frichet audio distance. What that metric in particular does is kind of asking, I have one distribution, I have another distribution, how much energy do I need to put in to morph one distribution into another? But you can use whatever other statistical metric you want. The embeddings that we chose, we just had an experiment where we tried to see which embeddings pick up the most on what we think is signal as opposed to what we think is noise. We ended up using clap audio, which is one of these papers over there. Yeah, is there a question or? Okay. All right, back to comprehensible things. Are the embeddings useful? Okay, so to run this experiment, what we did is we took embeddings from our model, which just means that we tokenized the audio, we passed it through our transformers, and we took one of the layers in the middle of the transformer. That's just a vector of numbers, so we're going to call that the embedding of an audio file. Actually, we kind of averaged it across time, but whatever. You pass an audio file, you get a vector of numbers, and then you can ask, are these numbers useful for, I don't know, downstream classification tasks, for example? So what classification tasks did we consider? I just kind of looked at SETI literature and cetology, ML kind of cetology literature, and said, what are people building classifiers for? So coda detectors, is this a coda or not? Rhythm types, so that's from the sperm whale alphabet, and kind of basically the rhythm pattern of codas. Is that encoded somewhere in the embeddings? Social units, okay, so we don't have a data set of diverse dialects of sperm whales, but what we do have is different social units that are all in the Eastern Caribbean dialect. And we have some annotations for that, so we can see whether the model is learning to pick up on which family you're coming from, if you will. And then vowel types, of course, the thing that started, or that at least happened concurrently with this paper and was really an interesting point about WhAM. So once we have these embeddings, we just train a 2-layer neural network that's allegedly only learning to extract the relevant information from this embedding, but it's not just learning to solve the entire problem. So we baselined it against random embeddings. They should not be very useful. And we also just took the majority classifier. So these are multi-class tasks. And then if you just pick the most common rhythm type, how well are you going to perform? Okay, so WhAM performs better than all of these baselines. And now you should probably ask yourself, all right, WhAM wasn't trained for classification. We didn't train its embeddings to be useful for any of these tasks. of course, let alone, telling it that there's something called a vowel and somehow training it for that. But even more generally, I think is like machine learning folklore is you sort of need to choose whether you're going to have a generative model or you're going to have useful embeddings. I think back in however many years ago that was, it was like, are you going to use GPT, which is better at generation, or BERT, which sometimes has better embeddings for downstream classification tasks? Okay, with all that disclaimer said, we took an off-the-shelf, state-of-the-art encoder only, like embeddings only model called AVES by Masato Hagiwara. It was trained for multi-species classification on a big data set, part of which was in our domain adaptation data set as well, and that outperforms WhAM basically on everything. One interesting thing for me to say about this, I mean, it does outperform WhAM, but the biggest difference really was between on the social unit task. And I kind of thought about that. I was trying to think why social unit is like a 20-point difference as opposed to the other ones, which are about 10. And I thought about the data set that we were working with and why would you even have different social unit annotations. And maybe even before that, if I were Shane and I was just trying to know which social unit this whale belongs to only from audio alone, of course the annotations were collected, using human eyes, but I would probably just think that different social units were recorded on different days using different equipment. And so this actually might be more of a feature than a bug. Like maybe it's getting really good at picking up the different recording conditions. That's something that you always need to worry about when you build these like bioacoustic models that are claiming to classify this thing versus that thing, is like, are they becoming really, really good microphone classifiers? Okay, so yeah.
Under the assumption that WhAM is doing really well on this.
Well, I mean,
in other words, you're saying that if things don't work out, that tells you that something about the microphone.
Oh, I'm just trying to, I think I just love WhAM and I want it to be my perfect thing that's good at everything. So if it's not good at something, I'm trying to understand why could that be. That's one possible explanation.
I have a question about the vowel. Was AVES, when it was designed to decide to do well on things like detection, rhythm, and social unit, was vowel one of the things?
No, for chronologically, no, but also, just to clarify, AVES was not designed for any of these tasks either. It's a general purpose embedding. So it was trained using Hubert, which is a self-supervised architecture to just learn embeddings. And then we did with AVES what we did with WhAM, which is we took these embeddings and we added a small two-layer head.
You're saying that AVES was sort of more, it's not a generative model.
That's like a, I don't know what hyperparameter level statement. That's like the authors of AVES designed their entire model and everything that they did because they wanted to get good embeddings. Right. The authors of WhAM made all of their design choices because they wanted good generation. Yeah, so that's a very high level statement, not a, yeah. All right. Good.
Just if you can say a couple of words about the data set that AVES was trained on, like are the sizes comparable between WhAM and AVES?
I actually don't quite remember, but I remember that when we were doing domain adaptation, we basically took as much of the data that it's all public.
They're comparable then.
But like we followed the list of things they did, and then whatever we could like recover, we said, all right, let's add that domain adaptation. We added Watkins. I don't think they had Watkins in there. It's actually kind of small compared to.
And super small question: did you try the classification task with just a linear probe, like not a neural network, just I guess?
Oh, like instead of a two-layer thing, having a one-layer thing?
Yeah, just like a log reg or something like that. Just out of curiosity to see.
No. I don't know why we ended up choosing. That was.
Just to see, I don't know. I'm doing some very similar work, and one of the first discussions that we had was like the nonlinearity would be represented in the embeddings, like it would be encoded in the embeddings normally enough. So isolating the task with the nonlinearity.
Yeah, probably the right thing to do is to take the smallest probe that recovers something. Maybe linear is not enough. It could be that, I mean, honestly, this was just specifically the downside. This whole paper was, what's that?
Maybe WhAM is better?
Maybe one is enough, which would be more satisfying. But that's a general like ML question, yeah. Okay, so we're almost done. I want to tell you one nice thing about this part of the paper, which was more tangential than the important generative part, but it allowed us to ask which components of the model are the ones contributing to it being useful. So we just had ablations where we kind of canceled. First, we removed the domain adaptation step. Then we said, what if VAMPnet is enough? Maybe VAMPnet is already learning enough about these things. And then we actually said, maybe the tokenizer is enough. Maybe the neural audio codec rhythm type is essentially counting the number of clicks and when did they happen. Maybe a tokenizer does that already. So we have all of these ablations. The answer is definitely no for the tokenizer. And generally, WhAM performs well or statistically kind of indistinguishable, except for the social unit task, of which I am already quite suspicious, but it's still worth reporting. Same thing I said about what are you actually learning when you're classifying social units? Are you learning noise or are you learning individual features of a whale? All right, so let me send you off with future directions, some things I think would be interesting. In general, this WhAM recipe is something that you could apply to any species. You could do domain adaptation, you could do species-specific fine-tuning. I don't know why you would do that. Like I myself, as I answered a lot of questions with, we were building a model of the acoustics, and it might be used for different purposes. I don't know if it would be useful for you, but at least from a scientific point of view, is this thing that hopefully I convince you works? Does it work in other species as well? What's its limitations? The obvious thing to say in 2025 is that we should scale up the training. We only trained the low rank adaptation. We're like a theory lab, actually. So this is the biggest stuff that we've trained by far and hopefully will ever train. And then maybe if you're like Google Perch or something, you're like, oh, I do this for breakfast, and like, why don't we just actually do the real thing? And retraining the neural audio codec, very important point that came up here. We should certainly look into that. We should maybe not just use VAMPnet. So we did explore a bunch of architectures, including it's like Audio Storm and all of that line of work, I think, out of Google. We tried using that. It just ended up being a matter of scale. We couldn't even train like a baby thing for it. We couldn't get it off the ground. So that's the nice thing about VAMPnet, about Ugo's code, is like it's academic. He's also a PhD student. It all worked in his lab. Okay. One thing that I think we really should do is just pass our model generations through our CETI code validation pipeline. These models are available online in general. And then you could say a really cool sentence like reinforcement learning from click detector feedback. Because like you have this auxiliary model, it's doing something non-differentiable, just like a completely outside signal, and you're tuning your model to be better with respect to this click detector. So that would be a fun follow-up paper to work on. Yeah, there were so many, based on the qualitative assessments, low-hanging fruit for how to improve the generations with like Audacity, with like a classical audio processing tool. I thought that if I open this can of worms, I don't know where I should end it, and I should just make this project be about how far can you go self-supervised neural listening alone. But if you want to generate nice synthetic codas, you should do that. All right, so that was it. And we asked a lot of questions during the talk. I don't know if we have any time left, but I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Orr.
Thanks.
All right, thank you, Orr. Any questions that have not already been asked?
Yeah, I guess just a quick one. I understand that the coda clicks are very brief, like tens of microseconds, or maybe I'm getting that wrong. What are the duration of the individual clicks in the sperm whale, typically?
Yeah, I mean milliseconds, not nano or micro, but they're very broadband, rapid onset, gone.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering with that structure, for a generative model, maybe this has been done, but why wouldn't you start with like representing it as just a click intervals, right? And kind of focus on the statistics there first.
So yeah, so those were essentially all of the prior works except for things coming out of Gashper's lab. They first And in a way, I think you guys know better than me that like spiritually, SETI was like a good argument for using sperm whales is that they have this easily discretizable communication. But that's us humans sitting there and saying, it's like a Morse code. I mean, it's just a Morse code. Let's 1 + 1 + 3 and so on. And now that we are carefully looking into it, we're starting to find out that maybe that's not the case. So if you're unaware, there's a beautiful paper that Gasper is like finding spectral properties in clicks. So, you know, you could say that I'm just clapping my hand or not, but then it turns out that I could clap it like this and I could clap it like that. And now all the questions that you're asking about information in this, you need to add another dimension. And I don't know what's happening in between these clicks. I don't know what additional properties are happening. So yeah, that's a great, it's a great direction. This one's different.
I just wanted to riff off that too, and then you can ask a question. But I think like the WhAM paper that was alluded to is all based on, all the predictive stuff is based on the interclick intervals and the patterns of expecting when interlocutors show up and so on. And this was taking that step back of audio to audio, and you gotta start somewhere. And so it was valuable in a completely different way. Yeah.
There's definitely something that should be done, hopefully not by me, which is like to take WhAM and plug it as like just an onset generator into this model that knows something about how clicks sound like and like what do they sound. But yeah, so a lot of things, yeah.
Just a recommendation with the graphs and stuff. You're showing the results and how percentage rights for the human raters or for the machine stuff, or comparing machine models. It's very good to do just like simple, t-tests on that.
Oh, it's all in the paper, yeah. Great. I just didn't want to. Yeah. I'll give you all of that. Kappa, someone's kappa for the inter-entity. I'm sorry, yeah, I forget the stats names, but yeah. I should add it as good. Okay.
All right, thank you, Orr. Appreciate it. So that concludes morning. We have lunch for you outside. We're going to pick up again at 2:30. So Rich is going to be giving a talk on restoring coral reefs at scale, AI and the next generation of conservation. And then we're going to have Tim coming in on self-supervised learning in transformer models for birdsong. So any other housekeeping, Safi, that we needed to? Nothing else? Oh, what's that? What's that? Oh, details about dinner at your house for 6 o'clock should be in your inboxes. And by the way, you do notice that we are filming. So if you don't want to be filmed or you just have some aversion, just let us know, and we will make sure that that you don't. But it's just basically for the archive. But all right, thank you all. See you back enjoying lunch. I guess we could eat right outside here, right? And yeah, and we'll. All right, we have to just pass through the auditorium outside here too. All right, see you soon.